Did you know that the verb 있다, which you've seen everywhere, it means to exist, but it also has a second meaning. It's kind of like it's two verbs. There is 있다, the descriptive verb that everyone knows that means to exist. So there is something there, there's someone here. But there's also another 있다 that's an action verb, and it doesn't mean to exist, although its meaning is a little similar. It means to stay somewhere. So to stay as in to not go anywhere, like to stay put. So why is this even important if it's the same verb? Well, it's because the descriptive verb 있다 and the action verb 있다 conjugate a bit differently. And that's just normal because descriptive verbs can conjugate a little differently than action verbs in certain situations. First of all, when you're conjugating the 요 form, it doesn't matter if something's an action verb or descriptive verb for general conjugation. You can simply conjugate this as 있어요 or 있습니다, etc., depending on how you're conjugating it normally. So it'll look the same. However, in the plain form, you do conjugate things differently whether they're a descriptive verb or an action verb. So in the plain form, the descriptive verb 있다, to exist, will simply conjugate as 있다. That's because descriptive verbs conjugating in the present tense are simply conjugated the exact same way as their dictionary form is, for the plain form anyway. But 있다, the action verb, is conjugated a bit differently because action verbs are conjugated differently in the present tense plain form. So while 있다, the descriptive verb, is conjugated as 있다 in the plain form, the action verb 있다, to stay, as in to stay put, instead conjugates as, or it's supposed to conjugate as, 있는다. And it doesn't stop at the plain form. When you have the regular negative conjugation, 지 않다, you'll also see some differences in how they're conjugated. First of all, the plain form negative form will also be conjugated in the same way as this. You would have 있지 않다 or 있지 않는다, but even when it's not in the plain form, it still will change a bit. For example, if you were conjugating one of these verbs into an adjective, so an adjective to describe a noun, so used directly before a noun, well, these would also conjugate a little bit differently because one of them is a descriptive verb and would conjugate as 있지 않은, and the other one's an action verb and would conjugate as 있지 않는. And this is the same sort of conjugation that any descriptive verb or action verb would go through when it's being used in this form. Now, if you're not using this in the plain form or using it as a negative adjective to describe something, you don't really need to concern yourself much with this because otherwise it's supposed to conjugate the exact same way. But it's useful to know that this is a different verb because you've probably seen it used this way before. Let me give you an example. 저는 추운 날에는 집에 있어요. So, as for me, 추운 날, a cold day. So on cold days, I 집에 있어요. I stay at home. Now, even if you didn't know that 있다 also can mean to stay or to stay put, you could still understand this sentence because you can just translate it as to exist. So I am at home on cold days. And it still makes sense and you're still happy. Although the translation of I am at home isn't what it should be, it's not too far from what the actual answer is, and it still makes sense. Or let's say that you're meeting a friend outside of your apartment, but you realize at the last minute that you've lost your wallet. You remember, oh, I left it in my room. You could say something like, 금방 갔다 올게. I'll be right back. 여기 있어. Stay here. So this usage of 있다 as an action verb to mean to stay is everywhere in Korean, whether you've realized it or not. Okay, so that's really all there is to know, that 있다 can be a descriptive verb and mean to exist, or it can be an action verb and mean to stay. But sometimes, really often actually, native Korean speakers mess this up as well. It's common to see 있다 conjugated into the plain form, regardless of whether it's a descriptive verb or an action verb, as just 있다. In fact, even when it's being clearly used to mean to stay, it can even look a bit awkward to use the correct conjugation, 있는다. Now, you wouldn't only see it in the plain form by itself. Remember that the plain form is also what you would use when you're making quoting. So if you wanted to say someone is staying at somewhere, well, it technically should be 있는다고, and then you can finish your quote. But it's actually more common to see native Korean speakers simply conjugate them the same way, 있다고, regardless of what it is that you're trying to say. So just keep in mind that even if it's not being properly conjugated the right way, it still can have that secondary meaning. Now I should note, this is not the verb that you would use when you're saying that you're staying at a hotel or you're staying at your friend's house, that sort of stay. This is more like staying put, as in not going anywhere, staying. If you wanted to say that you're staying at somewhere, like you're staying the night at a hotel or something like that, you would want to use a different verb, and that is 머무르다, which is more commonly just shortened to 머물다. So this one means to stay somewhere or to remain somewhere, and it's an action verb. So if you're staying in a different city, or you're staying at a hotel, or you're staying at your friend's house, any of those situations you would want to use this one. Whereas 있다 is just more of a general to stay, as in to stay and not go anywhere. So you can use either 있다 or 머물다, but just know the nuance is different. And before anyone asks, you wouldn't use 없다 for the opposite of to stay. If you said, don't wait here, you wouldn't use 없어요 or anything like that. This would just be for the opposite of 있다, to exist. All right, so have you ever noticed 있다 being used to mean to stay put? Let me know in the comments where you saw it. And thanks for watching. I will see you again in another episode. 그럼 다음에 또 봐.